Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Gideon narrative. The story is given to us in Judges chapters 6 through 8 in our continuing study of the book of Judges. Judges chapter 6 and verse 1, Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of Midian. Now Midian is way to the southeast of Canaan. So he gave them into the hands of Midian for 7 years. Verse 2, the power of Midian prevailed against Israel. Because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens in which were in the mountains and the caves and the strongholds. Notice the Israelites, they have to go hide in the hills, hide in the caves. Let the caves shelter them because their homes are being overturned, their crops are being taken, everything, even their very livelihood is being stolen from them. Verse 3, For it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites would come up with the Amalekites. Notice both of them would team up, and the sons of the east, they'd go up against them. So you've got raiders. Whenever it's time for the harvest, they know when the harvest is. It's seasonal. It comes at toward the end of the springtime, after the winter rains. The food grows, and then they say, well, we're going to come and take it all from you so we can go back and we can eat all your food. And that's going to leave the Israelites with nothing. Verse 4, So they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. Everything that wasn't nailed down they would take. Verse 5, For they would come up with their livestock and their tents, and they would come in like locusts for numbers. In other words, that's a lot. A plague of locusts is everywhere you look, everywhere you step, there's locusts. Both they and their camels were innumerable, and they came into the land to devastate it. These raids were devastating. Now, in verse 7, we see a prophet that comes up. Now, it came about when the sons of Israel cried to the Lord on account of Midian, that the Lord sent a prophet to the sons of Israel, and he said to them, notice he's not named, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, it was I who brought you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery. He goes on to say, verse 9, I delivered you up from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of your oppressors, and dispossessed them before you, and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live. But, and here's the problem, but you've not obeyed me. I took care of you, and you didn't follow me. You haven't obeyed me. Now, verse 11, we're going to see a man who does obey. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the vine press, in order to save it from the Midianites. Now, to understand what's going on here, something unusual is taking place. Gideon is beating out wheat, but he's not beating out wheat where you normally beat out wheat. Normally what you do is you beat the wheat in a big wide open place where there's a good amount of wind, maybe high up, and then you do like this fellow's doing here. You throw it up into the air, and the wheat you just throw it up and the wheat comes right back down, but the chaff, the kernel around which that wheat was located, it has been broken off and it's carried away by the wind. So what you're doing is you're removing the chaff from the wheat you're going to take and you're going to cook, and it will sustain you. The chaff is no good. It's like filler, so it's going to be blown away. And Gideon's doing that, but instead of doing it in a wide open place, he's trying to do this in a wine press, in a little cave, a narrow little area where you would step on grapes and collect the wine, and it's not made for that. And he's doing this because he's afraid. And so, verse 12, he's afraid that the Midianites and the Amalekites are going to come and steal it from him. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior. Now, he doesn't look anything like a valiant warrior. He looks like a fraidy cat. But the angel says, The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior. And so, the reason he can be a valiant warrior is because the Lord is with you. Verse 13, then Gideon said to him, O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened to us? You say the Lord's with us, but look what's going on. Look what I'm doing here, trying to beat out wheat and separate it in this little tiny cave. And where are all his miracles, which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. Notice, miracles aren't something that happen every day. Even back in biblical times, Gideon says, where's the miracles? There haven't been any miracles. Not since the days of Moses and Joshua. If the Lord is with us, then what on earth is going on? Verse 14, the Lord looked at him and said, go in this your strength, and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you? Verse 15, he said to him, O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh. Manasseh is one of the tribes, one of the descendants of Joseph. And I'm the youngest in my father's house. Not only is my family the least, but I'm the least in my family. But the Lord said to him, surely I will be with you, and you will defeat Midian as one man. You see, what makes a difference is that God is going to be with him. God says, I'll be with you. And because I'll be with you, even though you're from the smallest family and you're the smallest guy in your own family, you're the youngest, that's okay as long as I'm with you. Now, in chapter 6 then, we have the enemies of Israel. They have been coming and consuming the crops of Israel. And then the prophet came, verses 7 through 10, and announced judgment. And now the angel comes and gives his announcement to Gideon of this deliverance. But then in verses 17 through 21, we see the angel sends fire. Gideon goes and gets an offering and brings it to this messenger of God. You know, he doesn't necessarily know it's an angel with wings, that sort of thing. This is just an individual. It might be a real angel, but it's a messenger from God, and this messenger of God sends fire to consume the offering, which tells Gideon this is something special. This is supernatural. And so, verse 22, when Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord, he'd been talking to this one as a messenger, but now he realized, wait, this is for real, a messenger from God. He said, Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. That's serious stuff. And the Lord said to him, Peace to you, do not fear, you shall not die. Verse 24, then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and named it, The Lord is Peace. To this day it is still in Ophrah, of the land of the Abiezrites. And so, notice, God gives peace, shalom, to Gideon. And Gideon names the place, the Lord is peace. Yahweh, shalom. The Lord is peace. Verse 25, now on the same night, the Lord said to him, Take your father's bull and a second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal which belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, these fertility symbols, and build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of this stronghold in an orderly manner, and take a second bull and offer a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah which you shall cut down. So he's cutting down these sacred symbols and burning them as a offering to God. And so he's going to pull down this altar to Baal and build instead an altar to Yahweh, the Lord your God. And so Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had spoken to him. I think it's striking that it's 10 men. Remember how we had 10 plagues back in Exodus, and then 10 commandments, and then 10 things in the tabernacle, 10 again. And because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city to do it by day, he did it by night. In John chapter 3, we read of Nicodemus, how Nicodemus came to Jesus by night, and we don't frankly know why Nicodemus did it, but Gideon here comes by night because he's afraid. This valiant warrior is, to be quite honest, afraid. It's okay to be afraid, but don't let your fear stop you from doing that which is right. And that's what takes place here. Even though he's afraid, he does what is right. And so, Gideon is afraid. Verse 29, they said to one another, the people the next day, "Who did this thing?" And when they searched about, inquired, they said, "Well, Gideon the son of Joash did this." The word comes out. After all, he's got 10 people that helped him, and 10 people aren't going to keep any kind of a secret. Verse 30, then the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring out your son that he may die, for he has torn down the altar of Baal, and indeed he has cut down the Asherah which is beside it. He's been looting our sacred space, and so we're going to kill him." And Joash, to his credit, verse 31, Joash said to all who stood against him, "Will you contend for Baal, or will you deliver him? Whoever will plead for him shall be put to death by morning. If he's a god, let him contend for himself, because somebody has torn down his altar. If Baal is so to be feared, then let Baal take it out on Gideon." And therefore, on that day, he named him, notice Gideon gets a nickname, Jerubbaal. That is, that's just another way of saying Baal contender, Baal fighter. That is to say, let Baal, Jeru, let him contend against him because he had torn down his altar. And so that's the question. Are you going to contend for Baal? And notice if he's a god, let him contend for himself. And so he becomes the Baal contender, the god fighter. Because let Baal contend against him. Well, verse 33, then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east assembled themselves, and they crossed over and camped in the valley of Jezreel. That's the same place where we saw the last battle. If you're going to have a battle, that's a wide open area. You don't want to have a battle up in the mountains. Not everybody could make it there. So they're in this valley, this wide valley of Jezreel. And verse 34, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called together to follow him. And he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and they also were called together to follow him. And he sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet him. In other words, all the people that live in that area, all the tribes that are in that area, they gather together to Gideon. And Gideon now asks the Lord for a sign while the armies are gathering. He asks, can you show me a sign? And fire springs from the rock. We already noted that. Consumes the offering. That's how he knows that it's the angel of the Lord. But then he asks for another sign. Let me put the fleece out, and in the morning let the dew be on the fleece, that it might be wet while the ground remains dry. And God does it. And then he asks for a third sign. And in the third sign, again, it's with the fleece. He lays out the fleece and let the fleece be dry while the dew on the ground is wet. And again, God does it. God gives him these three signs at his request. And so now the armies are gathered, and they are on this big wide open, we're zooming up on this valley of Jezreel. And then Jerubbaal, remember his nickname, Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And so they're to the south of that same area where, by the way, later on we're going to see Saul facing the Philistines in that same general location near a place called Mount Gilboa. And so here we are. We're overlooking the mountain or the big wide valley and Mount of Moreh in the distance. And chapter 7, verse 2, the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give Midian into their hands. For Israel would become boastful, saying, my own power has delivered me. So I want to make sure that Israel doesn't take the credit. Verse 3, now therefore come, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead. I can imagine, because we've already read that Gideon was afraid. And so he's probably thinking, well, can I go? But he doesn't. But we do read that 22,000 people returned. And only, you start off with 32,000. All of a sudden, 22,000 are gone. And they've just cut the force by 2/3. And only 1,000 remain. 10,000 remain. And so we started off with 32,000, and whoever is afraid and trembling, let them depart. Now 22,000 leave, and God says there's still too many. And now I want you to take them down to drink, the 10,000 that you have left, and they'll drink from the brook. And everyone who laps water like a dog, just sort of, puts their face down and laps up the water, send them home. And only keep those who take the water in their hand and bring their hand up to their mouth. Well, that leaves only 300 that are left. And with this 300, God says, I will deliver you with these 300 men. And so chapter 7, verse 9, now the same night it came about that the Lord said to Gideon, Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you were afraid, notice this fear factor that keeps coming up. But if you were afraid to go down, then go with Putah, your servant, down to the camp, and you'll hear what they say. And afterward your hand will be strengthened, that you may go down against the camp. So what happens? Verse 11, so he went down with Putah. Was Gideon afraid? Yes! He was afraid! And he went down with Putah, his servant, down to the outposts of the army that was in the camp. And so he's showing his fear. If you're afraid, go with Putah. And he goes with Putah because he's afraid. Verse 12, now the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the sons of the east were lying in the valley, as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. Verse 13, and when Gideon came, behold, a man was relating a dream to his friend. Gideon and his servant Putah sneak up until they can overhear a conversation. And he said, behold, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread was tumbling into the camp of Midian, and it came to the tent and struck it down so that it fell, and it turned upside down so that the tent lay flat. What a dream! That was a weird dream. That was strange. Verse 14, his friend replied, this is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given Midian and all the camp into his hand. It's first of all, the dream is strange, and then the reply of the friend. I wonder if he even realized what he was saying. That he's giving prophetic attestation to the dream, that what this person dreamed would really come to pass. Well, notice Gideon has gathered the Israelite tribes against the Midianites. That was chapter 6, verses 33 through 35. And then we had the sign of the fleece in verses 36 through 40. And then Gideon's force was reduced, first by that anybody who wanted to go home, and then again by the drinking. And now Gideon's been told to arise and go down and listen in on what's taking place. And that was the pivotal point for Gideon. Because now we read again that the Midianites and the Amalekites are like locusts and sand on the seashore. And we read of what we just read, the sign of the dream, where they go down to the outskirts of the camp. So this other sign now is given. And now we read that Gideon gathers the Israelite tribes against the Midianites. And so now the battle's going to take place. And verse 15, when Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship, and he returned to the camp of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord has given the camp of Midian into your hands. The fear is gone because God has given faith. Verse 16, he divided the 300 men. 300, how are you going to divide them? Well, into 3 companies, 100 in each company. And he put trumpets and empty pitchers into the hand of all of them, with torches inside the pitchers. Now, picture this. They've got a trumpet in one hand and a pitcher in the other hand, and in the pitcher is a torch. I'm just one hand too short. Notice what I don't have. I don't have any weapons. And so in verse 17, the instructions are given. He said to them, Look at me, and do likewise, and behold, when I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do, and when I and all who are with me blow the trumpet, then you will blow the trumpet all around the camp, and say, For the Lord, and for Gideon. Verse 22, the plan now takes place. When they blew 300 trumpets, the Lord set the sword of one against another, even throughout the whole army, and the army fled as far as Beth Shittah toward Zererah, as far as the edge of Abel Meholah by Tabath. And so the battle takes place near the hill of Moreh, and it's a night battle. And true to their word, they blow the trumpet. They say the sword of the Lord and for Gideon, although they're not carrying any swords, and they break the They break the pot and wave the torch, and suddenly there's 300 torches waving all around the camp, and the people wake up and they begin fighting each other because they hear about the sword of Gideon. And wait, here's somebody next to me with a sword, and they begin fighting each other, and now the army breaks and runs, and they run toward the east and toward the south, as far as Abel Meholah. Verse 23, the men of Israel were summoned from Naphtali and Asher and all Manasseh. In other words, now that the 300 have gained the victory, everybody else is invited to come and do the mopping up operation. But now we read in verse 24 an issue with Ephraim. Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against Midian and take the waters before them as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they took the waters as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. What they're doing is they're closing off the escape route. And verse 25, they captured the two leaders of Midian, Oreb and Zeeb, and they killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, probably where it got its name, and they killed Zeeb at the winepress of Zeeb while they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon from across the Jordan. But here's the problem, chapter 8, verse 1. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this thing that you've done to us, not calling us when you went to fight against the Midian?" And they contended with him. Remember, his nickname is Baal Contender, but now they're contending with him vigorously. Verse 2, but he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer?" It's not like I'm trying to lord myself over you. Verse 3, God has given the leaders of Midian, Oreb, and Zeeb into your hands, and what was I able to do in comparison with you? And then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. He sweet-talked them, and he talked them down from actually what you were on the verge of doing was having an internal civil war among the tribes of Israel. Chapter 8, verse 4, then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan, and they crossed over, weary, yet still pursuing. And verse 5, he said to the men of Sukkoth, these are Israelites, but they're Israelites who live on the east side of the Jordan River. And he says to them, please give loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are weary, and I'm pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. And you would think he's just won a big victory, that he's going to have aid, at least some hamburgers and things from these Israelites. And instead the leaders of Sukkoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your army? Who do you think you are? You haven't won anything yet. Or so they say. And so both these cities of Sukkoth and Penuel, they both, when asked to give aid to Gideon, they both decline. And Gideon gives words of warning, words of judgment to both of them. To the people of Sukkoth, he says, I'll thrash your bodies with thorns and briars. To the people of Penuel, you say, you've got this big old tower, I'm going to tear that tower down, that place of safety down. And so verse 11, Gideon went up by the way of those who lived in the tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbeha, and attacked the camp when the camp was unsuspecting. This is the second time that's happened, but this time it's an actual attack. And when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the whole army. And so Gideon gets a complete victory over the enemies of God. Now, we get down to chapter 8, verse 22, where we're in the wrapping up sort of part of the passage. where the men of Israel say to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son, also your son's son. Set up a whole dynasty, for you delivered us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord is your king. The Lord will rule over you." They've asked Gideon to be their king, and he says, No, God is your king. But it would have been nice if the passage stopped there, if the whole chapter stopped there. Verse 24, "Yet Gideon said to them, I would request of you that each of you give me an earring from his spoil," for they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. In other words, you've captured this gold. I'll take that in payment. Verse 27, "And Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in his city, Ophrah." And an ephod is something that a priest would wear. It looks sort of like an apron on his torso. And you might have jewels or different things embroidered onto it of great value. And all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. That is, this ephod that Gideon makes becomes a relic, and the church begins to honor it and remember it and then even pray to it and treat it as though it were an idol. Isn't that always the danger of relics? Verse 28, "So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore, and the land was undisturbed for 40 years in the days of Gideon. And then Jerubbaal," remember that's the nickname of Gideon, "the son of Joash, went down and lived in his own house." Verse 30, "Now Gideon had 70 sons who were his direct descendants." Big family. In fact, it sounds like a kingly family. It sounds like he's living like a king, for he had many wives. That's what kings do. Verse 31, "His concubine who was in Shechem also bore him a son, and he named him," Gideon, it sounds like Gideon named him, "Abimelech." And that's a funny name to be giving one for somebody who said, "No, I'm not going to be king because Abimelech," Abba is father, Abi is my father Melech is the word for king, my father the king. And that's just an unusual name to be naming him. Verse 32, "And Gideon the son of Joash died at a ripe old age, and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And it came about," verse 33, "then it came about, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the sons of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals, and made Baal Berith, Baal of the covenant, their god." And so we've come full circle to see the rebellion, the salvation, the restoration, and now the rebellion again. Verse 34, "Thus the sons of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the household of Jerubbaal," that is Gideon, "in accord with all the good that he had done to Israel." But we'll see that next time.